everybody, and welcome to Outside the Wall, the podcast with the highest concentration of intellectual fuckwittism. My name is Evil Dex, and I'm joined, as always, by Raym and Wally. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Today we'll be talking about Satoshi Kon's Perfect Blue, the 1997 animated Japanese film. This is a movie I've seen before, but neither of my co-hosts had previously watched. The way we came to this one is that since I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager, I wanted to revisit it with Raym, but I had to do some convincing because he has an extreme phobia of rape in movies, so I had to suffer through a Spanish movie in order to get this one seen. That's all I really need to say on it, and I'll give the floor over to Wally to give his thoughts.
So I probably, of the three of us, I have the least amount of anime watching experience under my belt. I'm not opposed to it at all. I actually recently come to appreciate the form more. So this is probably only, I want to say, like the fourth or fifth anime movie or series I've seen. But I enjoyed it. It definitely, as far as the whole plot is concerned, it definitely had a twist I did not see coming, which says much because I'm usually pretty good at picking out so those twists halfway through a film. This very much, I think, is kind of metaphorical or even literal to the sort of celebrity type worship that exists both in Japan and the United States, although I would argue it's probably much worse in Japan than in the United States. And overall, the art style I enjoyed, the writing itself I enjoyed, and the different characters was overall I was very pleased with. I don't have too many huge complaints about the film itself. So, Raym?
Yeah, so this is my first time watching Perfect Blue, but I had seen a bit of Satoshi Kon in the past. I think he, Evil Dex can correct me on this, but I think he worked on this Memories anthology movie.
Yes, he was the director for Magnetic Rose, the first, and I would argue the strongest of those shorts.
Yeah, I remember that one pretty well. I remember seeing it years ago, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think it's great. And I would add that Satoshi Kon is the one who's responsible for it being so good because Katsuhiro Otomo's original version is not that great. I've read the manga version.
And in the past, we had also seen Evil Dex and I another Satoshi Kon film together, which was Paprika. That one's actually pretty good also, great animation. And I also really like the plot of this one, how it was handled, the tension with Mima and her stardom. As you would like say, yeah, I do have try to avoid films with certain depictions of rape in it. I try to not be graphical, but I think the way the movie handled it was actually very well done. It was not distasteful, and it actually kicked into the plot, so it wasn't just something gratuitous and unnecessary. It was pretty well done for it. The animation is great. Even today, it's a lot better than a lot of stuff that's still done today. The editing is very good. A lot of these scene changes, I think, were done very well. That it seemed like since Mima is a former pop star, now becoming an actress, she is acting in this serial that's it reminds me a bit of Silence of the Lambs, where they're looking for this serial killer that's apparently taking body parts and they don't know who the killer is in this case, and they do make some scene changes, some transitions where they went from the real life, let's say, to the serial, but they do a small transition where you're at the start wondering if it's the serial or the moment about it, and the twist is also done very well, and it's I also didn't see it coming, but in retrospect it does. It's not something that's like a forced plot twist. It's actually very, very well done for what the character is meant to do. Rumi, her agent, and I like this. I very much recommend it.
So I've seen all the Satoshi Kon works that Raym previously mentioned, as well as his TV series Paranoia Agent, and I liked them all. But I would say that this is definitely my favorite out of everything I've seen by him. I want to see the other ones, Millennium Actress and Tokyo Godfathers as well. I will probably like them since I've liked everything else of his. Now, I was the only one who had seen this before, so I guess I'm in the best position to testify that the foreshadowing of the twist that was mentioned is very good. There are a lot of scenes that on second viewing sort of make it easy to understand how that character ended up acting in the way that she did. This is a film that makes really good use of animation to enhance the storytelling and editing as well. Like Graham said, it explores the relationship between an artist and his art, or her art in this case, and it does that in a very interesting way where the line between Mima's real life and this characters that she's playing starts to become blurred. It's very quick transitions from scene to scene that helps to sort of emulate that effect on the viewer as well. That was a really well-handled element. The rape scene, like Graham said, is really, really well handled. One of the highlights of the movie, I would say, and as twisted as that may sound, it actually explores the idea. It's not actually a real rape in the context of the story. It explores the idea of an actress playing the role of a character who got raped, but it kind of depicts it in such a way that it's similarly traumatic to going through the real thing. One thing I liked about it is that there's a small detail that I wouldn't have thought of, which is that the director pauses between takes and the actor who's playing Mima's rapist has to stay posed above her for when they resume, and sort of quietly and shyly apologizes to her. And then when the tape starts rolling again, he goes back to trying to ravage her. I thought that was really good. That helped sell the sense of how this could be just a mortifying experience. And it was kind of clever because, again, I don't think I would have thought to put something in like that. There's some imagistic elements that I thought were really good. A particular shot is one where Rumi is depicted as the perfect version of Mima that she imagines herself to be, but you see her true self reflected in the pane of glass in a window shop, where her imaginary self is effortlessly skipping through the city, but her real self is all fat and sweaty, running and panting horribly. I thought the visual contrast there was really effective. Psychological story that's well handled and has interesting themes. I would highly recommend it to anybody who likes animated films or really just movies in general. I give this one a 9 out of 10, and I'll leave it at that and move into informal discussion.
Yeah, that you bring up a point I wanted to mention too with the animation is that ending bit where you have the agent contrasted, you have the persona of the actor and then contrasted in the reflection in the window of the actual agent panting and gasping. I think that definitely speaks of something that can only be done in anime or animation. Even though, truthfully, probably with today's technology, it could be done in modern films. But I think even for its time period, it's definitely a nice touch that this form definitely helps bring out in the storytelling, and just some other minor things like that I noticed as far as the animation.
Yeah, I think Satoshi Kon is probably one of the only guys you have who uses animation to explore these sort of darker, more mature stories, and uses the potential that the medium brings out that isn't explored in the West, especially. We can kind of use that to transition into one of my personal pet peeves, which is the subject matter that cartoons and comics have been stuck with in the West for basically decades now. One thing that I find very enticing about anime and manga is that they are able to go into these much more adult, darker, more violent stories that can lead to a lot of more complex ideas that you don't see explored in cartoons in the West, even though they definitely have the potential to explore them in an interesting and unique way. So that's probably...
I definitely think it's just part of overcoming stereotypes and cliches, because I would say the same thing happened both for two completely different mediums. One would be science fiction novels or science fiction works, which very much in the 50s and 60s and 40s was very much like this pulp sort of thing that kind of got poo-pooed by your more literary types of people, but now has kind of slowly been made accepted. And to the other end, it would be just modern video games. The fact that in the 80s and 90s, it very much was the nerd culture, and people, either the stereotypical guys living in their mom's basements playing games like this. Whereas I think a lot of modern things, particularly something like the Nintendo Wii, has kind of brought it to such a mass audience that it now is okay. It's normal. It's normalized. Whereas I think that that probably hasn't happened quite yet with anime or comics. Not to say that it can't happen, but I just don't think it has gotten there yet, which is a shame because I think as this movie Perfect Blue indicates that if more people saw films like this, their perceptions of it would change.
Yeah, it would help too if we had more auteurs who were working in these media and sort of push them towards that. That's something that kind of did happen in Japan. For example, Osamu Tezuka, who's known as the god of manga in Japan, was like a really, really prolific manga creator who made like hundreds of series over the course of his life. And it was in the early days of manga where the medium hadn't really been fully established yet. And he would explore a lot of darker themes. Or he would deal with things like rape, murder, genocide, and all these other sorts of things in his story, and did it in a pretty mature, well-handled way. So he kind of helped to bring manga out of the like rut that I think Western comics have kind of ended up in, because they quickly got forced into it during their formative years because they didn't have those same auteurs, perhaps. And there's a little bit of a legal aspect of it too, where apparently the U.S. Government started putting pretty harsh restrictions on what could be depicted in comics and cartoons pretty early on.
Yeah, well, I guess I could even speak to my own experience on this because, as I mentioned in our intro, of the three of us, I've probably seen the least amount of anime, and part of that was those stereotypes. I mean, I had grown up as a kid watching mostly Pokemon, a little bit of Dragon Ball Z, and then that was my impression of anime at that time, and up until maybe say 5 or 6 years ago. And then when I saw, I think the first one was Full Metal Alchemist. Watching that had kind of changed my view on it because I looked and said, okay, I mean, it still is kind of, the plot itself has definitely meant for kids to be watched, but there also are these adult themes that are taking place that I had thought at the time not possible in that medium, and it proved me wrong. And like I said, I'm now one that is okay with watching anime because I know what the medium can do. It's not just something that's kidified, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Tezuka because Tezuka, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I know that he did push a lot on the, not just the manga but also the animation. He has some films that are apparently, as you mentioned, have darker, more mature themes and very well regarded in terms of animation. I haven't seen them. I don't know if I will, but like Belladonna of Sadness, I know has come up several times. Yeah, I do think that a lot of the animation of comics and cartoons in our Western lands have a lot of potential that haven't been explored. They could really deal with a lot of topics and about it. Most of them, I do like a lot of them, and I heard them very well, but there are a lot that they could definitely push forward to a boundary they haven't been there.
Do you think that the best way for this to kind of go quote unquote mainstream is to have an American or Western director kind of create an animated film or an anime film? Because that way you have, like, just for the hypothetical argument, say Christopher Nolan decides his next film is going to be an anime film, or maybe even a better example would be Wes Anderson, because two of his films, The Fantastic Mr. Fox and his most recent one, Isle of Dogs, have resorted to this kind of old style stop animation reminiscent of the old Ralph Bakshi films from the 40s and 50s. And that kind of, I think, don't quote me exactly on this, but I know it has given that style of storytelling a lot more prominence because of that. So do you think that would have to be what it takes to get anime in a more recognizable and acceptable form, or is it just a case that we have to keep plugging movies like Perfect Blue and other already made films to get people aware?
Well, I think they both can help. There's a little bit of a risk that with the idea of like a Western developer doing it, which is sort of butcher it in such a way that we come off as really cheesy. Like we can see that with Western adaptations of anime material so far, like the Death Note Netflix film being a really good example. Everybody completely hated that. But if a talented director like Wes Anderson or Nolan did it, I would have at least be a lot more optimistic about it.
Yeah, I think also a thing with these animated films that we've seen is that they're, despite being more mature and darker, they're not necessarily like just edgy for edginess sake. So
Right.
So because there are, let's say, like animated features that are clearly not for kids, but they're not necessarily mature. They're just not for kids. So I think an example about that will be something that we watched that I did enjoy, and I find it very fun, and I will watch it again, which is the South Park film, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. And it's clearly not a kid's film, but I wouldn't say that it's something mature.
It's not exactly mature, no. It does have social commentary in it and satirical elements and stuff like that. They kind of elevate it as material, though, in a way, make it more sophisticated than something that's just like pure gore, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
Well, do either of you think that maybe part of the problem is, and this is only from my own viewing of what little I have seen, is that a lot of the anime, I can't speak for manga at all, but a lot of anime is based more on Japanese culture and lifestyle, whereas that might not translate to an American audience or even a European audience?
Yeah, I think that definitely helps it become kind of a niche. And one thing we see with like modern dubs and things like that is that they will tend to keep the pretty Japanese stuff in. Like they'll still use the Japanese honorifics even when they're speaking in English, and they'll use like otaku terms, like tsundere and stuff like that, that somebody coming to it from the first time probably would not recognize or find embarrassing. So that could potentially be a problem, although I still think that's probably the right choice for those adapters. But I'm not just talking about like Western prominence of anime. I'd also kind of would just like to see more like adult-oriented cartoons coming out of the West that are of a distinct style from anime, but still have some of these more interesting themes.
I think.
So I take it Rick and Morty doesn't fill that niche for you.
No, I wouldn't personally say so. One movie that I would kind of big up though is The Incredibles by Pixar, which is of course a family-oriented movie, but I do think has a lot of pretty like interesting, kind of almost deep themes about family growing up and commentary on the superhero genre. Toy Story 4 is actually another example, as it deals with the concept of aging and finding meaning in your life when the things you thought you were doing no longer are relevant. I thought that movie was really good.
I think if we were an animated movie that we watched together that I love, love. It's Such a Beautiful Day.
Oh yeah, you definitely can't go without mentioning that one.
That one's I think that's an amazing animated film. It's very short; it doesn't like 60 minutes. Don Hertzfeldt, and that's I think a good example of what an animation that deals with a lot of topics that are more important with life, I'm sure, in a very, very great way. And I will recommend watching if it's for a different kind of animation and themes from our side of the hemisphere, Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I feel bad that I didn't mention that one for favorite. Definitely watch that immediately. I highly recommend.
I'm surprised, Xdeath, you didn't use this opportunity to plug Cats Don't Dance again.
I don't think you can. I was tempted, I admit, but I don't think we can fit that one into this too easily. It does have some commentary on like the cultural vapidness of Hollywood, but it's not really that adult. Another two I could mention, of course, are Akira and Evangelion, two other sort of psychologically themed anime that I really, really love. Akira I would cite as the greatest animated film of all time, just because of the style of like the incredible proficiency of the animation itself, and also because it has, I would say, a quite complex story.
Yeah, the animation in Akira is really top notch. I mean, the motorcycle sequence at the beginning, it's quite a delight. You could practically just that as a film, and it will still be one of the greatest animations ever made.
Yeah, there are shots in that movie that would be completely boring in any other movie, but are like transformed into quietly mind-blowing sequences just because of the sheer amount of detail and character that they fit into the animation.
Definitely, yeah. Akira is also pulled that from the animated films that would seem that, and yeah, it's arguably the best animation film would seem. It was.
So I guess to change or to get back on topic of Perfect Blue, I'm curious what you guys thought. I had brought this up in my intro to it, but what you guys thought of its portrayal of celebrity culture. That's the easiest thing that stuck out for me is kind of this. It was very much a critique on the celebrity culture, which I know for one exists in the USA and I know exists in Japan. And from my understanding is, like I said, much worse or can be much worse in Japan than it is in the US. So I'm curious what you guys think of that.
I think regarding not just the celebrity culture, but also the fandom culture, because
well, that's part of it. Yes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that's basically what also fits in with Rumi's plot, because she has this idealized version of Mima, and she's this cute, basically innocent and sexually cast girl, but she's clearly going through another form now, and the fandoms doesn't accept this. The stalker, the Mimania guy, is very much trying to hug, like when he hugs all the episodes. I think when she gets raped in the series, so no one else gets it. I think that was a very nice touch to his obsession, and it is I think a good critique about it, of how they can be in the expectations that they have, and how they can pretty much force themselves or suffer or in order to grow in their career, so go to what the audience or what they think their audience will want them to be, or what they feel they should go to, but it's actually not what they really want to, because Mima does suffer from her on-set character rape, and she's clearly not. It wasn't really something that she was okay with. So, Abledex.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, it has to be understood that Perfect Blue depicts a very extreme instance of like the celebrity culture, but I do think it's a good examination of it. It kind of ties into the theme of this connection between the artist and her art, where Mima's old self-image that she created as a member of a pop band kind of starts to become its own identity that drags her down. That's really interesting. What the film deals with obsession as well, where these fans, as Rain went over, are so entranced by that old illusory version of Mima that start going to extreme acts to try and preserve it, even as reality repeatedly shows that it never really existed. I think it's a very interesting examination of all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah. The parallel movie that I can think of would be Stephen King's Misery, and the obsession of the one of the main characters in the film over the protagonist's writings as an author, to the point where she basically kidnaps the author and forces him to rewrite one of his most recent novels in the way that she wants it, because she had come up with this kind of fantasy about the characters and about his works and about the world that he created. So yeah, there's very much, I think, that parallels nicely in Perfect Blue. And I also think, although I could be viewing this in very much the modern political lens, is that it's a very kind of good peek into what we would call the incel movement, especially when, Ram, you mentioned how like a lot of the fans or the crazy fans were imagining Mima to be this kind of still pure and almost virgin-like quality to her. It almost like, to me, it almost begged the question if these guys were kind of having very much sexual fantasies of Mima and just kind of what they wanted to, quote unquote, do to her.
Yeah, I think that's definitely present in the movie. The sort of fetishization of her character, like that can also be expressed through the rape scene. I think Satoshi Kon almost comes to a point of depicting it as sort of unethical to ask an actor to go through something like that, because
Right.
it's portrayed as like it's compared to being raped for real, basically, by the way the film sets it up.
Right, because a kind of I think a real life parallel to this is a story I remember. Carrie Fisher. That the story Carrie Fisher had told about regarding the original Star Wars films with her portrayal as Leia Organa, and how I think she had said at one point, this years ago, decades ago, but a fan had come up to her during some signing event and had told Carrie Fisher that he, as a kid, had like posters and like dolls and stuff of Leia Organa dressed in that bikini scene from Return of the Jedi. And it was almost like one of those things where it's kind of mind-blowing. One, that I guess maybe not mind-blowing that people would have that kind of vision, but that they would not only publicly say it, but publicly say it to the person they were fantasizing about. That pretty much encapsulates this kind of weird, crazy fandom that happens, which I think Perfect Blue also demonstrates.
Yeah, Japan has I should probably not talk to as if I know much about this, because I haven't like researched it, but Japan does have a particular phenomenon of this sort of thing that's like even extra pronounced. They have lots of problems with people just not really having relationships or having sex at all, and they have a bad fertility rate as a result. I think there's something called the hikikomori, which is basically just a permanent shut-in who doesn't get a job and closes himself out of life altogether, and it's like quite overly common in Japan, and that's why there's a Japanese term for it. And there's also an anime that explores the life of someone like that called Welcome to the AHK, which I think is really good. I watched as a teenager and loved. And unfortunately related to the main character, probably to a better extent than I would be proud to say.
Well, there's also, I know in Japanese culture, in a couple of articles I had read, there's this idea or this business that is, while it's not prostitution, that doesn't deal with sex at all, but there's very much this business, and I'm trying to recall based on the articles I've read, that where these like guys essentially can pay these females that I think tend to be dressed up in certain anime characters or characters and then basically they get to be like their girlfriend for the day or how long they pay them. I know there's that exists in Japanese culture as well.
Well, that's what's called an escort service, and exists in the West as well, but it has like the specialized anime twist to it.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also the maid cafes and stuff, which are basically just like themed cafes where it's a bunch of waitresses dressed up as maids, stuff like that. That's a phenomenon that's particular to Japan, I think, or started there anyways.
Yeah, regarding Mima on that spot, I think it does happen a lot, but as you mentioned with the incel movement about but she can't have done that. She couldn't have done that and stuff like that. Now they have this idealized version of the person and how they are meant to be for them, but not for anyone else. And I think it basically does explode into how some of these darker takes also happen in life, with Mimania at the end trying to rape Mima. And that wasn't that was actually now a real rape attempt. So Mima, and definitely Mima doesn't go through it, but it does show how a fandom can go horribly wrong with trying to idealize someone and then punish them for not having to stay true to the ideal that they have set up.
Right. I'd actually be curious to see the literature on this regarding how, if there's a tie, which my hunch is there is, between this sort of like rabid fandom and psychological kind of things like sociopathy or even psychopathy.
Or maybe
Because
just
for-
isolationist tendencies in general, perhaps.
True, yeah, because just the fact that Raymond, you'd mentioned where these fantasies suddenly clash with reality, but they refuse to accept it, to the point of doing damage not only to themselves but other people around them, including the person they're fantasizing about.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to comment too much on a link like that without having.
Well, like I said, I'd just be curious seeing the literature on that and seeing if there is a connection.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, no, I think I don't know if there's anything else that we have to say.
Okay, yeah, I feel pretty bad because I promised Perfect Blue is actually a very interesting to talk about, even though we talked mostly about other things. So as a concluding remark, I'd like to say, watch It's Such a Beautiful Day, watch Akira, watch Evangelion, and watch Katso Dance. Good night, everybody.
Well, I would say too that as someone who doesn't have as much anime experience and who had for years had this kind of stereotype of what anime was, this is definitely one of those films that I would recommend for people who are still on the fence about wanting to watch anime, because I think this will show not only what the medium can do, but also in terms of storytelling, but also what types of stories can be told through anime. So I'd give it a recommendation.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you. I also recommend it, and see you. See us next time.